Hey everyone, welcome back to the Libertas International Podcast. I am really excited about this guest we have today. The guest we have today, her name is Alessandra Serano. I've known Ali for about 4 years. We've worked a lot of different cases together all across the United States involving Americans who travel overseas to abuse children in other countries. I've learned a lot from her. I've seen her in her element, and I'm just super impressed with the person that she is and the knowledge base she has. I don't know if I've ever had someone on this podcast with so much knowledge about anti-human trafficking, as she's got 20 years working in the federal system. She's come up against true evil, stood her ground, and fought for justice on behalf of people that couldn't fight for themselves. And it's such an honor for me to know her just on so many different levels. She's so kind, for one. She's such a thoughtful person. She's so knowledgeable about all these different things. When I first sat down with her, I could talk to her for hours and hours and hours because she's hilarious. And she has so much knowledge about how this crime has changed, and how all these stories about how she's gone up against traffickers for the last 20 years in a variety of different settings, and how she's watched the crime change. And she's very real. She's very genuine. You never have to worry if Ali is not being her true self. She will be her true self in every moment. I remember I needed some feedback once about me, and I'm sure I'll tell this story in the podcast, about me not speaking up at a sentencing. And Ali, because of her experience, corrected me, and it made me a better caregiver, to where she told me, hey, you always speak. I've seen judges change their mind on the stands because of the testimony of a bystander. And, not everybody is great with feedback sometimes. I've seen where she's given feedback and it hasn't been taken so well. But it's always done with love. It's always done with knowledge, and it's always done for a better outcome for everybody involved. And so I'm super grateful that she would be on this podcast. I consider her a friend. I think the world of her. I look at her resume and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like she's just living life to the fullest, which is something that we also talk about in the podcast of why she does that, and why she puts so much into this life that she lives. And I know that you will gain a lot from this conversation. She's very knowledgeable. She's very smart, very passionate about the work. And for me, it was such an honor to spend an afternoon with her as we took a break from something that was happening politically that was, I think they just ousted the speaker or something. But she took a break and we chatted, and I learned a lot from her, as I always do. And so it's an honor for me to welcome onto the podcast Alessandra Serano. Please check out her resume. Please check out the show notes for more info about her. And I know that just as I did, you will learn a lot from this conversation with the amazing and the wonderful Ali Serano. Ali, how are you doing?
I'm good, Tyler. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to have you on the Libertas International Podcast. As I was telling you pre-show, you're someone that I really admire. I've learned a lot from you. Things that you've said to me, that you've helped me with, have made me a better human trafficking professional. But I'll get into that in the show. It's here in my show notes. But I'd love to start off the show, Ali. Tell us about Ali Serano. Tell us about your background. Tell us about your experience. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you like to do, and what makes Ali tick.
I don't know if we have enough time for all of that. I'm kidding. The short Cliff Note version: born and raised in New Jersey by a single mom. First person in my immediate family to graduate from college. First lawyer in my family, and found a interest. I don't want to say a calling, because that connotes kind of like a spiritual thing, but I found a big interest in helping people and through the justice system. And so I always knew I wanted to be a criminal prosecutor. So after working for a private law firm in LA for a couple of years to pay off my law school debt, or most of it, I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Diego, where I was fortunate enough to work on child exploitation and human trafficking cases and got to do some really cool assignments within the Department of Justice. I love the job. I love the mission. Hopefully made a difference in at least somebody's life, maybe two, to help them get justice, whether it's a trafficker going to prison or restitution that was paid to them or what have you. Because I believe that the way you stop this problem, like any problem, is prevention and education. And the more information you get out there and public awareness of what it is, how to stop it, how to intervene, will make more people more aware of the problem and hopefully, lessen it, if not eradicate it altogether. That's probably the pie in the sky wish, but that is what I try to work towards.
Cool. So, human trafficking, tell me where, like your first case, how did the first case come across your desk? Did you tell me about the first time you were exposed to it as an attorney or as a person, whichever one came first, and why you decided that was something worth dedicating your professional life to?
So growing up in the 1980s, yes, I'm going to disclose my age, sort of. I mean, it was all about stranger danger, right? I could only play in my front or backyard where my mom, had eyes on me. Only play and hang out with kids that my family knew or parents knew of, because that was the threat, right? That some person in a rape van, these non-window vans, going to come kidnap you, and then that's you're going to end up on the side of a milk carton. Yes, I'm dating myself. They had put pictures of missing kids on the side of milk cartons. When I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office, I got a case from a Homeland Security agent, and I'll never forget the defendant's name. He had a prior sex molest conviction, and during the course of that case, that state case where it was a hands-on molest case, they had found thousands of images of child pornography, or CSAM. I know it's called CSAM now, but under federal law, it's still called child pornography. And this agent came, into my office and said, "Hey, I hear you're new. You wanted to try something new. Here's this case." And reading the reports about the description of the images and the ages of the children depicted in some of the videos that this perpetrator had just was disgusting and just awful. And I thought, wow, these are like real kids and they're being harmed because this, person, I use that in air quotes, this individual, sucking up oxygen in the world is looking at this stuff, trading it, sharing it, perpetuating that harm. And I took that case and I got a, great sentence for it. And that agent brought me more cases, and his colleagues brought me more cases. And then I got cases from, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and other agents, and just literally started just doing more and more cases. That was 2004, 2005 timeframe. In about 2009, I started to realize, just from doing all these cases, it's like, well, who are these kids? Like, these are kids just depicted in videos. Obviously, they're real kids. But how did they get there? Right? Like, it's, you always hear stories if it's a neighbor or an uncle or, somebody taking advantage of them, but sometimes they're trafficked. And so I remember getting my first human trafficking case. It was brought to me by a local police department. And I say, I don't know anything about this, but I didn't know anything about child pornography cases either. Let's roll with this case. And we actually went to trial. We charged 4 defendants. One actually went to trial, got a guilty verdict. And I don't want to say the rest is history, but the rest is history. Just started doing more and more of them. And increased the number of prosecutions in my office by over 500% over a 5-year period. And just wanting to do more and taking the more difficult cases where victims were not necessarily cooperative. Sometimes we couldn't find them, but bringing that case anyway, knowing that I was going to go to trial potentially without a victim, just because I thought this was a horrific crime. And looked back at my own upbringing that, I was, again, raised by a single parent, latchkey kid, grew up in a neighborhood that, there were some sketchy parts and there were some nice parts. And, this could have been me. This could have been my neighbor. This could have been anybody. And so the idea of helping people hopefully seek some kind of justice. And so as a prosecutor, the way you do that is, prosecuting the bad guy and getting restitution for the victim.
That's I actually wrote down some questions just based on those stories that you shared. That was my first case too. One of my first cases working at human trafficking was a CSAM case involving two little girls that were being trafficked by their mother. And reading the description of the videos, and then seeing them for the first time. When I met them for the first time, we had put in like a rabbit farm in their aftercare home, and so they took me on a tour of the rabbit farm, and it was just a real moment after being given their case file and asked to support them in aftercare, and then having them give me a tour of their home. It was just a surreal experience. So a couple of questions on just based on what you just said. How often do these guys not plead guilty? Like, do you get a lot that plead guilty or not guilty, or do you have like a percentage of that, or what does that look like?
I don't know what the nationwide statistic is. I don't even know if there's a difference between, federal crimes, if someone's charged with a federal crime versus a state crime. I just know that I think it was the year 2011. I had 7 of these trials in 8 months. That's a lot. That's a federal trial a month. And so it took a lot of effort. I think I got more gray hair during that 7-month period than I've ever had before. But it was one of those things that most of the defendants that I saw confessed to it when they were confronted with it. They admitted what they did, but knowing the penalties that they would receive, especially in federal court, some of them just said, you know what, I don't want to plead. I'm gonna make the government prove its case, and so went to trial. I had, knock on wood, gotten guilty verdicts in those 7 trials in that 7-month period. I think it was 7 trials in 7 months. I think that's what it was, or seven trials in 8 months, something like that. After that, most of the cases I got, they did plead guilty. I think I gained a bit of a reputation. I have a Facebook post. One of my agents was doing an investigation of a human trafficking target and was going through a Facebook account. And one of the friends of the purported target was like, "You don't want to fuck with that Alessandra bitch. She'll get you." Yeah. So, I mean, there's not many Alessandras out there, who are prosecuting cases in San Diego. So, sending a message to the community, like, don't be doing that, and definitely don't be doing that here in San Diego. So to answer your question, I don't know the percentage. I did go to trial quite a bit because I was one of those folks that, like, you don't want to take a plea? Fine, we're going to go to trial, and you're going to have to explain to 12 people. Well, they don't have to explain anything. I would have to share or, prove my case beyond a reasonable doubt. And then, if that person chose to put on a defense, they could, and explain why all my evidence is incorrect or false or whatever.
That's such an interesting way to look at it too. Because I really believe that in a big way, that's a good way to prevent this crime, is to make the bad guys too scared to commit it, at least too scared to commit it in San Diego. That's something that we talk with our team in Colombia quite a bit at Libertas International, where if a bad guy is unlucky enough to come across our path, like, we want to punish him, put him in jail, take his money, take his assets, publish his face everywhere, use the media as our tool, and create that fear to where they'll go somewhere else. They'll go somewhere else because it's too dangerous for them to come to Colombia, because they know that there are severe consequences for them. And so I love that you mentioned that, and that you have that reputation. And that's good advice. That guy's advice is, I think, good for all of us, that you are not someone to mess with. That is for sure. You mentioned the prosecution and restitution. I think whenever we post about like a prosecution, Like we had this case where we had this guy named Frankenstein in Colombia who was sentenced to 22 years in jail for trafficking his niece, and all of the comments on our Instagram post, Facebook post, were like, that's it, 22 years, like that's it, kind of freaking out about the time. And so I like the community, I think, as a whole knows that prosecution and restitution are important. But can you kind of speak in to why prosecution and restitution are important for the victims? And I would even go even further to say not just important, but healing, how prosecution and restitution are healing for the survivors.
Sure. So let me start off by saying that I don't believe that prosecution is going to eradicate any social problem, meaning you can't prosecute any government, whether it's the U.S. government, Colombian government, Ugandan government, any government. Prosecution alone is not going to eradicate the problem, whether it's drug usage, human trafficking, whatever unlawful activity. I believe there are three prongs to it. Prosecution is one of them. Protection and education or prevention are the other two. But prosecution is important because once the person has decided that they are going to commit this offense, whether they're going to sell the drugs or, shoot somebody, or in our cases, sell them for money, exploit them for something of benefit, then they need to be held accountable. And so the idea of a public prosecution or a press release about the conviction or about the case, I think is important to send a message to hopefully that person, in the community who might be thinking about this. Maybe they'll decide, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I might do something else illegal, or hopefully they'll change their mind and say, oh, I want to, get a regular old job and not, exploit somebody. But I think it's important to put that message out there about the prosecution out there. As far as the restitution aspect, it's not something, admittedly, when I became a prosecutor, thought of to do right away. That is not something that is innate generally with most prosecutors. Their goal is to put the bad guy, the bad person in jail, in prison. And restitution is kind of a collateral thing. But having been a prosecutor for over 18 years and now working for an NGO that helps this, restitution is an important piece to help, number one, punish the defendant. Not only are you going to lose your liberty, but we're going to take your shit, the stuff that you got as a result of exploiting this person or persons. So we're going to punish the person, the bad person, the trafficker, and hopefully simultaneously provide some kind of financial assistance back to the victim. I mean, you're never really going to make the victim whole again. It's not like, if you break your arm and you put it in a cast, your arm pretty much gets back to 99%. These people who have been trafficked never, I don't want to say never, almost never get back to 100%. But it is a way to be able to give them some hope to get their lives back on some kind of normal path. And so if that is relocating, if that is paying for school or changing jobs or what have you, it is just one thing that can be done to help them get on that path.
So speaking of take their shit, tell us about the pimp stick.
So the pimp stick. So in San Diego, we had a lot of primarily African-American gangs, but there were other organized crime and gangs that it kind of like looked the part, like what you typically think of, like, the movie Hustle and Flow, or not to really date myself, but like Huggy Bear on Starsky and Hutch, that you were probably not even born when that show came out. But anyway, the very flamboyant type of clothing, and a lot of the pimps, the traffickers here would wear these crazy hats, and they would have these goblets that had like bedazzled jewels on them. And then I had one trafficker who had a pimp stick, and it was just basically it was a curtain rod is what it was, that he had bedazzled with his gang moniker. And he'd walk around, at the Players Ball or other types of, social pimp events, wearing this, and that was his thing. And so as part of that particular case, in addition to forfeiting cars and other assets that these traffickers had purchased, we took all of his clothing, pimp stick, Gucci shoes, you name it. If they bought it, because none of them had legitimate income, we took it as a result of illicit proceed. So yes,
Man,
pimp stick.
What an asshole. Do you have that, or did you sell it and give the money back to the victims, or what happened to the pimp stick?
The pimp stick may or may not be in my living room. But no, it has no monetary value. And I would hate for something like that to be recycled. It's like reselling, a drug scale. We don't want somebody to think, oh, this is great, I already have this, and now I can, perpetrate this type of crime. It's not like a vehicle that could be used for a legitimate purpose. So yes, it was criminally forfeited, and I may or may not have it in my living room.
That's awesome. What an asshole. That's awesome you took that from him. I want to circle back on that because you said something really interesting there. But I'm interested to know your thoughts, and I just wrote this question down. This wasn't one of my pre-planned questions, but people say the legal system has a backlog. Do you think that we will ever recover from that backlog, or at least the pandemic caused backlog? Do you think we'll ever get back to where we were before?
So the backlog as a result of the pandemic was because most courts, at least in the United States, I can't speak for every single one of them, but most of them didn't hold trials. And so you have these defendants that are waiting for literally their day in court. I want to say my understanding is most of that backlog is done. They've gotten those cases done. The issue are the civil cases and the other cases that, had piled on because people were still committing crimes. People were still, violating the law. And so there's all these new cases that have been filed. So they're, coming out. I know that here in San Diego, the court essentially never closed. So people were having trials here. It wasn't as many as they normally do, unlike in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where the chief judge of that court decided to keep things closed and not bring in jurors and that sort of thing. So it's literally on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Well, speaking of case-by-case basis, I want to move up to New York City from the Virgin Islands. I speak for myself, and then obviously, Jessica, you've helped with a number of cases up there. Mine being the Victor Galarza case, the man that was traveling to Colombia, abusing girls and uploading it to Pornhub. And then do you have a case with Jessica he was a pastor or a bishop or something that was abusing a little boy? Am I getting that right?
He was a teacher. I don't know if he had any religious affiliation, but he was a teacher, and that's how he got access to the victim we were assisting with. Okay.
And I bring up I know we mentioned this pre-show, but I'll interject again so the Victor Galarza case, I'm going to hijack your podcast for a second, was actually my first case involving an American being intimately involved in an American case where the victims are overseas and the bad guys here. And so it was first and foremost just an honor to work with these survivors. Like, they were so brave, they're so amazing. So many of them have done so many amazing things. One of them, which actually sits on my board of directors now. Did you know that? Did I tell you that?
I did not know that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So one of the survivors from the Eternal Spring case sits on the board and approves salaries and dictates media. She's amazing. And so it's even like talking about this now, like having it be full circle and seeing the amazing things that these girls are accomplishing. But I remember I had an experience in court where the federal judge asked if I wanted to say anything, and the DOJ looked back and looked over, and I just shook my head. I said, no, I didn't prepare anything. I didn't say anything. And I'll never forget the ass chewing. That's a strong word. The teaching moment that you gave to me in the taxi ride to dinner. You were like, hey, everything was good. It's a good sentence, good restitution, but I got to tell you something. And at this point, I'm just like, oh no, what's coming? And you were like, you told me, if a federal judge gives you a chance to speak in court you take that chance. You share your thoughts. You bring up your notes. You give a statement by the survivor. You do something to make your voice known in federal court. Because I've seen, speaking, as you, judges change their mind on the stand based on the testimony of a victim advocate or an aftercare provider or the victim herself. And I had no idea. I had no idea that was even an option. I didn't know that was going to happen. But it was a teaching moment for me, who, at this point in my career, I maybe had 7 years working in anti-human trafficking, but never in a federal level, versus you, who's had obviously 18 years working in this just at the federal level, being able to mentor me of like, this is going to make you a better aftercare professional as a whole. And so I took that to heart and it's funny because Jessica asked me, she was like, are you okay with like what Ali said to you? And I was like, oh yeah, like I felt nothing but love and support based on like her comment and her recommendations. And I use that in all these different cases I've had since. The current count is 12 or 11 cases involving an American man who's abusing girls in Colombia specifically, where I've gone up to the sentencing and been asked to speak in the sentencing. And I've spoken at every single one. And I can only think of one time where my words were not quoted back to the defendant in the process of that sentencing, where something that I said based on my experience with the girls, he then spoke back to the guy as he was delivering his sentence and the restitution and all that stuff. And so for me, like, that's what really stands out with the Galarza case and this case in New York. And first of all, I thank you for that, for making me a better human trafficking professional, and for seeing enough in me to correct me. I had a basketball coach once that told me, the day I stop getting after you is the day that you should be worried, because I just don't care anymore, and you're not worth investing in that way. And so I appreciate the investment you made on my part. But with those two cases, like, if you can, like, tell me about them, your experience working on the restitution side of that, like what these people are like these bad guys, what it's like working with an NGO, collaborating with the DOJ to try to get as much justice as we can for these survivors.
Sure. So, to just your kind of overall point first, I mean, judges are people too. And even though they're federal judges and you have to stand up when they come into the room and you have to call them your honor or sir or ma'am, they're people. And most federal judges hear cases where there is no speaking victim, right? Most federal crimes, it's drug trafficking or arms trafficking or smuggling. Those are the general. There are a bunch of different federal crimes. Most of them don't hear victim cases. So the idea that there is a third party in the room, right? There's the prosecution, there's the defendant, or the defense counsel for the defendant, and then you have this third party, this victim. I think it's important to have victims' words or be represented, whether it's by a letter or a video statement or a statement made by a victim advocate if the victim, him or herself, can't be in court. And I think it really personalizes. And again, judges are people too, and they're going to like, okay, this is a real person I'm dealing with. This is not some random company or something like that. It's a person. So I think it's important to be able to speak. If the victim can't speak, him or herself, that somebody does that speaking for them. As far as the restitution, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's not something that federal prosecutors think of like right away when you do cases. It's all about getting the conviction and sentence. I don't want to say it's all about that, but that's a really important part of it. And restitution, at least in federal court, is part of the criminal sentence. And so, and I struggled this with earlier in my career, working victim cases, the federal government, is just not equipped to deal with, especially human trafficking or child exploitation cases where the victims or survivors need so much support. They're just not built that way. And that's why it's extremely important to be able to identify organizations, NGOs, other entities to assist prosecutors with that, so that they can provide the aftercare, they can provide the counseling, they can, or resources to help that person, because it just the federal government is just not, it wasn't built that way. And so partnering with NGOs is super, super important, so they can do that legwork. They can gather those receipts, they can lay out that money for counseling, education, repatriation, whatever it is. And so working that case with you, I remember going back and forth and trying to explain to you like what type of money we could get. Now, not only could we get the expenses that were already incurred, but we can get future expenses. Like how much counseling is this person going to need? What type of financial resources this person is going to be able to, need to recover. And so the law allows for that. And so I think it was helpful, at least I thought, that, you have a prosecutor who knew all of that, but to sit there and crunch numbers when that's not her, I don't want to say her primary focus, but that's, her head is on to the next case, because that's where I was. It's no fault. I'm not faulting her in any way, shape, or form. That's just the way it goes. So it was helpful to work with you because I knew what she needed. I knew what the judge wanted, and to be able to put that in a format that, hey, this is how much we think these individuals are owed. And ultimately it's up to the judge, right? Like we submit it on behalf of the victim. You make that statement to the judge, and then the judge ultimately has the authority to calculate it. And it's up to, the judge whether he or she wants to order or not.
That was such a fun trip, seeing justice served in that way. And I remember we ate at that same diner like 3 or 4 times. Just such a good trip. But even like you describing it, I've never thought of it in that way. But I had the guy from the Texas case reach out, and he was like, that was the easiest restitution claim I've ever done, because you guys had everything set up. You guys were in communication with all the survivors. You guys had the receipts, the numbers. We just gave it to him. And like, I think you and I, like 3 or 4 phone calls, we had this document of the restitution ask. He took it, and we ended up getting that full restitution. So I would imagine that the feds want that, because I would imagine it also increases their standing before their bosses, or reputation, where they get a good sentence, but they're also like, that number shows up on the news release too, of how much restitution was actually achieved through the case. I would imagine that's really good for them and for their careers as a whole.
Well, I can't speak for that particular prosecutor. I just know that if I could go to sleep that night knowing whether I was, employed by DOJ or working for an NGO, and I could simultaneously, punish the defendant because that defendant's going to have to pay some money, and help the victim. I mean, how is that not a win for everybody? And as far as, putting that in the format, I didn't realize the AUSA, the federal prosecutor, said that was an easy restitution, because we did all the math. And lawyers generally don't like math. I don't like math. The idea of, crunching numbers, I mean, it's pretty painful. And when you're overloaded with cases, which I'm sure that prosecutor was, I know I was, if you can make it easy for them, like, here is everything, here are the receipts, and here's the number. We have this psychologist that says this victim needs counseling once a week for 2 years, and this counselor charges $100 an hour. You can do that math, and it, I don't want to say it's an easy sell, but it's something easy to explain, not only to the prosecutor, because the prosecutor is going to have to advocate for that, to the judge. That makes sense. So as opposed to giving them the equivalent of a box of receipts and having them go through that, like, nobody wants to do that. So let's make it easy for them and help them do their job better. I mean, that's the way I look at it. Help them do their job better.
I agree. I only have 2 more questions for you. The first one is, you mentioned earlier in the podcast, sometimes you work with uncooperative victims. What do you do if a survivor says, I don't want to testify, I don't want to help really with this? How do you go about prosecuting the case? Because I've heard some good answers to this question, and then some answers that I just strongly disagree with. Like, one of which is, well, you force them and you withhold aftercare until they agree to help. What are your thoughts on if you get a survivor that does not want to collaborate? How do you respect that? How do you work with her? Do you just go forward with the evidence that you have? What does that look like as far as your job?
So what I try to do as a prosecutor, and even as an advocate now working for an NGO, is you have to meet them where they are. And that doesn't mean, like, if they say, I don't want to do it, oh, I gave it a try, that's it. I'm thinking of one survivor that I've worked with, and I'm still keep in touch with her. where she came forward. Her trafficker trafficked her for about 9 months. It was a pretty brutal case, like severe beatings, that sort of thing. And she came forward because she thought, all right, I want this guy to go to jail. I want this guy to go to prison. And then she realized, wow, I'm going to have to testify in court. She was just 18 years old at the time. I don't want him to know. He knows where I live. He knows my family. Like, I'm not going to do that. So I remember her lying to me, saying, everything I told you before is bullshit. I lied. And I'm like, okay, if you lied, then tell me how you got this bruise. If you lied, then tell me this. And if you can convince me, then okay. And of course, I knew, and she knew damn well, that the truth was the original thing. And so once I got to dig a little deeper and invest that time in her, like, where is this coming from? Well, it was fear, right? It's one of your primal, feelings, happiness, sadness, fear. Like, she was scared, and that made sense to me. So it's like, okay, well, let's try to address that fear issue to get you on a situation where you would feel comfortable testifying. And so I remember spending an inordinate amount of time with her. These cases take up a lot of time, and I'm trying to do all these other cases, but I'm, I don't want to say babysitting, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but working with her and showing her the courtroom, and this is where the judge is going to sit, and this is where the 12 people who are going to know every intimate aspect of your horrific abuse is going to listen, and this is where the defendant is going to sit, and just working with them to understanding that. Now, if you've tried everything, whether it's trying to build that rapport, meaning what you say and saying what you mean. If you say you're going to come visit them at 6 o'clock, you better be there at 6 o'clock. I had another victim. She was in the local women's lockup. She had been arrested for something. She had been a victim in my case, trafficking case. And while the case was pending, she got arrested for something. And she called me and said, are you going to come visit me? I said, yeah, I'm going to come on Tuesday. Well, something happened on Tuesday. I didn't show up. I didn't show up until Wednesday. And boy, did I didn't hear the end of it. You said you were going to be here and you lied to me. And I was like, you know what? You're right. I fucked up. I'm sorry. Like, and I sat with her and I said, that will never happen again. My bad. And I owned it, and we moved on from there. And she ultimately testified, and we got a guilty verdict. So I don't like to force them. That's not to say that I won't. There are tools that federal prosecutors have that can compel witnesses to come to court. There's a statute that says we get to incarcerate you for a period of time until I don't like doing that. I ultimately would want victims to want to come forward because they want to do that, for whether it's because they feel like they don't want the trafficker to do any more harm, or they want to have a say. They want to be the ones, with their case. There could be a myriad of reasons. Putting all of that aside, I did a case where I could not call my victim. She was 14 years old. She was developmentally disabled. A public court proceeding would have completely destroyed her mentally. And so I did that case without the victim. We got a guilty verdict because I had cooperators and other evidence. I've had a victim testify for the defendant. He's my boyfriend. He's not my pimp. And I thought, oh, good God. And I remember talking to her parents, and I said, if she lies, she's going to jail. Okay. I don't care if this happened to her. She lies under oath, she's going to jail. So let her know that. And that goes with any witness. And they must have said something, because she's on the stand, and the defense attorney is thinking this is going to be a cakewalk. And she asked, did my client know how old you were? And I'll never forget, she looked at the defense attorney, she looked at the defendant, and then she looked at me, and then she looked back at the defense attorney. She's like, I'm not going to jail. I'm not going to lie. He knew I was 16. It was like the movie, The Few Good Men, the code red moment. You're damn right, I ordered the code red. Like, you're shocked that this came out of the witness's mouth. And I remember thinking, holy shit. Like, all of my cross-examination that I was going to talk about all the different things, I had to ask her 4 questions, and I sat my ass down, because you don't want to have, defeat out of the jaws of victory, right? And I remember after the case, the judge came by and he was like, I don't know what you did, Miss Serrano. I don't know. I said, I didn't do anything. Like, I let the witness know that, penalty of perjury. And, that was the end of that. So you have to be prepared. These victims can be volatile. They can go up and down. I mean, they're people. They're going to have their own emotional issues. And so the short answer is you try to work with them and try to exhaust every avenue you can to get them to want to come to court and cooperate on their own volition.
Well, you said something in just what you said there of meeting the survivor where they're at and not where you'd like them to be. Like, we found that survivors are much better in cases like this when we've invested so much time with them to meet them exactly where they're at, help them get where they want to be, and then to know whether things go great in court or whether they don't, we've still got your back. And having that safety net and that those people to count on, it's not perfect, but it sure makes one hell of a difference in my experience. Last question, Allie, and I'm going to steer away from human trafficking for a second. In your, I think your LinkedIn profile or something, there's YOLO that's somewhere in your Instagram or somewhere in your social media, and you're one of the people I think I've met in my life where you really internalize that if you only live once and living your life to the fullest. And I know so much of that has to do with your mother. And you mentioned what an amazing woman that she was and how she's a single mother and she raised you. And so for the last question, I just want to give you the floor to talk about why doing YOLO is so important to you. And if you feel comfortable, the influence of your mother in the way you live your life now.
Sure. So for those of you who don't know what YOLO is, it's you only live once. And it's something that I have taken to heart. I tried to, but it definitely became real for me when my mother passed away when I was 33 years old. She died of cancer. She was told that she had a year to live and she lived 5.5. Tells you how tough she was. Like, she was like, fuck that. I'm not dying. Cancer's not going to get me. And she passed away at age 55. I will be 52 the end of this month. So I can't imagine. And she was diagnosed when she was 49. And the doctor said you had a year to live. So when I turned 50, that was such a milestone for me that I can't imagine someone telling me I only had a year to live. I can't imagine not being on this earth 3 years from now. And that was what happened to my mom. And so when she passed away, me being 33, she was 55. I thought, oh, she's old. Well, now that I'm very close to the age that she was when she passed, there are days I feel old, but most days I don't. So it's like, you've got one shot at this life. You're not guaranteed tomorrow. And so make the best out of whatever it is every day. If that is, drinking a cup of coffee and enjoying the sunrise, then do it. If it's taking a trip somewhere, awesome. If it's, having a glass of wine with some friends and enjoying their company, do that too. Or if it's eating, Ben and Jerry's out of the tub with a spoon, do that too. Like, I'm not suggesting that should be an excuse, to be a poor human being or break the law or harm somebody else. But really just knowing that we're not guaranteed tomorrow. We could wake up or not wake up in the morning. And so just taking those opportunities as often as I can. So that's something that stays with me every day of my life, every day. So, yeah.
Well, that's beautiful. And I imagine that your mom is so very proud of everything that you've done. I know that from my point of view, I'm so grateful to know you as a person, as someone that fights for the survivors in a way that I can't. And am I good to tell the audience that you continue to assist Libertas in the cases that we have with American citizens?
I will be happy to do that. So I don't want to disclose where I'm going next job-wise, but I told you, Tyler, I would be happy to help you in any way I can with your victims. I think this is something that is so important. It's so important as a, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, Black, white, Muslim, Catholic, it's an issue that affects every human being on this earth, no matter where you are, where you live. your socioeconomic status, whatever. And I'm excuse me, going to do my part to help where I can.
I know we're super grateful for that, just, as an organization and a board. And when I mentioned that you would be assisting in some of these American cases that continue to come, we found our niche, and it's the niche that just keeps on coming. And we're big into doing all we can to make sure these guys pay not just with their time, but with their money as well. And so thank you for supporting us and being a part of our team. And my last question before we close, so part of your YOLO thing, and it's just, I know you've been to all 7 continents, and so I'd like to know kind of what's your favorite place you've ever gone, maybe top 2, maybe. What is, out of all the places that you've been, these 7 continents, which one is the one that you're like, this is my spot, this is the one that I can't wait to go back to?
I can't answer that because all of them have something special. I mean, I camped on Antarctica. It's so pristine. I mean, to be out there and hearing the penguins and the ocean life, just you're camping out on the ice. It was so serene. Whereas Africa, you have animals, and the people there are just so warm and welcoming. And I love visiting Africa. I mean, Europe, the food. I'm Italian American. My God, the Italians do food and wine and life right. I don't have like a favorite place. I mean, there's different categories. Like my favorite place in Europe is probably Italy. I've visited there multiple times and definitely get into the whole culture of drinking wine and eating good food and gelato every day. But just the untouched, nature of Eastern Africa, Central Africa. I've trekked with the gorillas in Uganda. So I can't answer that. There's something special about every country that I've been to.
For sure. I thought for sure you'd say Italy based on the wine. I thought for sure that would be the answer. So I'm glad that you gave at least one plug for wine in the in this interview. But Allie, I just want to thank you again for your time. I know that you're a busy person, and thank you, I guess, on behalf of Libertas International for continuing to support us. I know that we'll be working this many, many years in the future, helping take a lot of money from these American pedophiles. And if people want to find you or connect with you, how do they go about that? Do they go to your LinkedIn, or if people have questions, follow-up questions, they can go through the podcast? Or I guess if people are fans of yours, how do they get in touch with what you're doing?
Oh dear, that means they need to get out more. They're a fan of mine. Certainly people can hit me up on LinkedIn. I have a Facebook account. It's under my real name. So, I'm happy to talk, or share interests, that sort of thing. But, yeah, happy to help. I try to pay it forward. I think that's super important. That's part of the whole working with survivors, just paying it forward, because hopefully, like your board member, she was a survivor and now she's on the board. Now she's going to pay it forward. And so if we can do that, we'll be in a lot better place.
Yeah, I love that survivor. It's been such an honor to watch her grow. And she's extremely qualified to be on that board. Like, not only does she have the lived experience of the population that we're serving in these years since the case happened, she's graduated vet school, so she has her veterinarian license, and she's worked part-time, invested that money, and with a small gift from our part, she's now started a pet business in the place that she lives. So she's a business owner, graduate of graduate school, veterinarian school, insanely qualified, and she continues to benefit from restitution that Ali Serano helped get for. And so, Ali, thanks again for being on. I hope you'll come back with us, and I know all of us, especially me, can't wait to see where your next adventure is.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tyler.